Welcome to this webinar on Open Data 101 for Culture and Arts. My name is Mauricio Delfin, and I co-direct the Culture and Arts Policy Institute with Gonzalo Casals. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm very excited to be here today. I'm going to ask Gonzalo to let other people that come in as you see them appear on your screen. And we're going to start with just telling you what we're going to do. But the first thing is, can everybody see
Mauricio,
my screen correctly? I just want to
Mauricio,
check.
Mauricio, before you start, you need to make me co-host so I can.
Oh, good one. Hold on. That's why it wasn't happening. There we go. Are you co-host now?
We're good.
Excellent.
We're good.
Okay, cool. So if everybody sees my screen, we are the Culture and Arts Policy Institute. We are a relatively new organization. We started around 3 years ago. And our work has to do with cultural policy and cultural governance in our sector. We focus on research, education, and advocacy. And we have an open data program, which has been going on for the last, since we started actually. I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing and building towards this year. But this is a webinar we wanted to present under the framework of Open Data Week so that we could really provide an introductory opportunity for people in the sector and anybody who wants to learn how we're bringing open data and at the intersection of culture and arts. But before we start, I wanted to welcome Andrew Kittredge from Beta NYC, who is representing Open Data Week today and working in partnership with OTI, and just welcome him and ask him to introduce himself and maybe give us some introductory words. Andrew, you there?
Yes. Hey, thank you so much, Mauricio. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Kittredge. I am the director of the Civic Innovation Lab here at Beta NYC. On behalf of the entire Open Data Week team, I'd like to thank you all so much for being here and for being a part of the 10th anniversary of Open Data Week. Our core values are to connect, to learn, innovate, and collaborate, and that's what meetings like this make possible. They create space for people to come together, to share knowledge, ask questions, and imagine new ways of building a more open and participatory city. Their impact is measured by whether people feel welcome, connected, and able to participate. Open Data Week demonstrates what this community has built. This year's huge number of events, organizers, organizations, and volunteers contributing their time and expertise matter not just because of the scale, how big that number is, but because they represent a growing community of people committed to civic participation, public interest technology, and to one another. I hope that you'll check out the rest of Open Data Week, including the in-person event tomorrow that the Institute is also hosting, which I'm sure you'll hear more about. Beta NYC also is hosting an in-person conference, School of Data, on Saturday, March 28th. And the following day, on Sunday, will be our inaugural Unschool of Data. And I'd like to just thank you again for being here and for helping us to celebrate this 10-year milestone. And with that, back over to Mauricio.
Thanks, Andrew. And yes, happy 10th. That is quite the accomplishment. We're really happy to be here. We actually started participating in Open Data Week. That was our first program, actually. And we began talking about open data and this framework of open government that we are working through. Open government essentially has three parts: transparency, accountability, and participation. And in that area of transparency, open data is a very powerful topic, layer, and also a community, as we'll talk about soon. And then, well, that was the first year. The second year, we gave a sneak peek of a report we have finally completed and that we'll be sharing with you as well. And that sort of research phase set up what we're working on today, which is a project called the Culture Data Commons, which I will also talk about soon. So let's start. If that's okay with everybody. Welcome to those who just arrived. We're going to start with talking about just how data already shapes funding policy, visibility in our sector. So this is something that already happens. This is the reason why this is important. It is not something new. It is not something recent. It is something that already has an effect in the way that our sector is structured and the way that certain scenarios of possibility are created, right? Now, the problem, aside from the fact that uh, I mean, the problem is that there is a gap, right? Most of us lack access to that data, but more importantly, we lack agency over it. And with that, we mean the capacity to do stuff with it, not just access it, but work with it, leverage it, transform it, use it for a number of agendas that we have as people that might be individual artists, cultural workers, arts organizations, art service organizations, and just the entire plethora of actors and stakeholders that are part of this sector, right? So what we're going to cover in this webinar, and I'll try to keep this to 45 minutes, hopefully even less, so that we have time to have some questions and interaction. I won't be looking at the chat carefully. Gonzalo is in charge of that right now, but we will go back to that very soon at the end to see if there's some questions that we can address, right? So what we'll cover is what is open data, why it matters for altering culture, what's not working today in that context, and what becomes possible with open data through a particular perspective that I'll share. So this is really not a technical training in that way. This is more of gaining an understanding of where we're at right now, why this is important, and just this basic foundational language and sort of position that we're in that we are working from and we want to work towards, and we want to work in collaboration with you, with every single stakeholder and interested party, not only in the sector, but cross-sector, and especially in the open data community, because this is an effort to bridge the culture and arts sector with the open data movement. So that's what makes it really exciting for us. So let's start with why data matters for culture and arts. For advocacy, we know that this helps us make the case for funding. It gives us evidence so that we can sustain our agendas and present our points of view and suggest changes to what is happening, transform concretely the reality, right? So, for example, funding disparities can be addressed when we have data to be able to identify them and interpret what that means and how policy can respond and improve that situation, right? For research as well, it can help us understand trends across the sector, but not only that, as you'll see, we can get really specific and really target a particular problem of a particular constituency, of a particular group, a particular infrastructure. There's many things that we can do. That's part of the work that we do at the Institute. It's very important because data also helps us in planning. It helps us identify gaps in service, for example. Service or access, right? And so, for example, when we talked about underserved neighborhoods, that entails that we know what does underserved mean and what are neighborhoods and why that unit of measurement or attention is important, right? And it's also very important for our purposes in this conversation. It's important for collaboration because we are at a moment of great maturity in general with data in the ecosystem, but in the culture and arts sector as well. Not because everything is done, but because we're at a point in which the maturity of the sector allows us to move into a next stage, which is what we want to talk about today, right? Sharing, combining data, collaborating, and stewarded collectively data. So what is open data? Really quickly, we won't go through, we won't get really into this, looking at all the technical standards, but let's just grab four of the main factors, right? Open data means anyone can access data, can use data, can modify data, and can share it, right? We're really going to pay attention to the difference between accessing data and using data, which sometimes get confused, right? So accessing, using, modifying, sharing. Now, access, like I said, it's not equal to use. And this is something that it's very important as we move to this next phase of work, which entails more sophistication, right? Accessible means that you can see it, right? But not necessarily that it is usable, that you can work with it, right? So, for example, a PDF, as many of you, I'm sure, have encountered and collect them obsessively as we do, allows us to access the data, right? Even a dashboard. I'm sure you've seen websites where there's a dashboard, you can visualize things, you can switch filters, and they're very important for us to navigate complexity, but they're still not usable. We cannot necessarily extract the information and be able to use it for other purposes, right? So the equivalent, like the format that allows us to do that is, as we'll see, comma separated values, an Excel spreadsheet, structured data is what we'll call it, right? So PDF is one that we can access, we can't use, spreadsheets, structured data that we can utilize for our purposes. Sometimes it is only view only. What we're going for is stuff that we can download and analyze, right? So we're going to be talking a lot about what seems to be open data, but it really isn't. And we want to move away sort of from the poetic nature of open data, right? Well, my data is open. Maybe you're trying to say my data is accessible, but is it open really? And is it usable to the extent that we can produce more things with it, share it, innovate, collaborate, right? And do more with it, make it more transformational, right? So what makes data truly open, right? There's a dimension of the format. Uh, Open data requires machine readable formats, right? That's your Excel spreadsheet, your comma separated values, your JSON if it's geographical data, but it is not open if it's a PDF, it's if an image, if it's a dashboard, right? The most concrete example is what if you want information and they give it to you in a printed document, photocopied, right? You have access, but can you do things with it? Can you process the information easily, right? There's also the issue of access, right? Open data requires bulk download. Like you can download all the data sets and do stuff with it, or an API, which is an interface that allows us to talk to the information to the data hosted and stored somewhere else and use it and transform it and cross it with our information or our needs in a very granular way, right? The equivalent for it's not open if it's only view only or if it requires a login, right? That immediately generates a barrier to access the fact that you have to identify yourself, put your personal information, etc., right? Now, there's the other part, which is the license, right? We want open licenses, which allow us to reuse if it's allowed, right? Now, it is not open if there's no license or if there are restrictions. This means that if I go and I find a data set and I don't know if I'm able to use it, if it's not, it doesn't have a license attached to it, I might get into trouble. I might not know what I can do with it fully, right? And if I access data that I can't access because there's a restriction, it is not open, right? This is another dimension that we need to consider when we think about what is truly open data, right? The other aspect is metadata, which means data about the data, data that tells us something about the data that we're going to use. And that means having clear definitions, documentation, right? Other documents that tell us, well, look, what you're looking at is a survey. It's structured this way. We did this in this year. We consider these variables. We anonymized personal information. We aggregated certain things. So it tells us like the social life behind this whole thing. It gives us the variables for us to know what is behind this effort, right? When we have no context, when we have no explanation, it's a lot easier to make mistakes. It's a lot easier to produce things that are not fully effective, that are not fully based on reality, right? It makes us have several assumptions, right? The other part is timeliness. We want stuff that is updated regularly, right? The data that is static or outdated, of course, presents several limitations. Now, it's important for us to also know that there are resources already available for us. The Open Data Portal, for example, that I'm sure you know about if you're here, the Open Data Week has to do with the Open Data Portal and all the things that are accessible there. And if you go in there, you'll be able to see information that you can download, information that is paired with a data dictionary, information that has clear indication that they use a share alike license so we can reuse it. So it's a place where we don't have to ask for permission to use things. It is there proactively so that we can use it for whatever we need to. There's also an application interface that allows us to connect our data sets together, other applications for different purposes. There's around 3,000 data sets in the Open Data Portal right now. We are going to talk about the ones that have to do with culture and arts, For example, the ones that have to do with the Department of Cultural Affairs, which we know, just for reference, that there are only nine of them out of the 3,000. Uh, we're going to get into that, what that means and what it could possibly signal for us to move towards in the future, right? I won't go into the website just now. We might circle back to that one at the end when we have more time. I would like to get across the presentation and then we can get to it. But it is very important, and we would really recommend that you take a deep dive in there and you see what's there to be used. There's a lot of really high quality databases, other ones that are not so much. That's very normal in a portal this complex with so many different agencies participating in it. So it's really important for us to know that not all data is open data, nor that all data should be open data, right? There's a lot of the times when we talk about open data, people will say, but there's privacy issues. Of course, there's privacy issues. Of course, personal data, private data should not be out there openly, right? Of course. So there's that part for our work um, in the arts, for example, right? There's a kind of internal data, for example, that can only be accessed by your organization. Of course, we interact with that all the time, right? Every arts organization does that. An example is an attendance spreadsheet. We don't usually share our attendance spreadsheets because they have emails, personal information, and it's also information that helps us build our newsletters and whatnot. Is something that we actually promise comply with not sharing, right? That's internal data. That is absolutely, of course, part of our work, right? There's also shared and published data that the public can view, like, for example, an annual report, right? A PDF. Several of them on your website, I am sure. Now, that itself is not open data. It is data that is accessible, but it is not open data. Open data is data that anyone can access, use, and reuse, and it's a data set with comma-separated values or an Excel spreadsheet with a clear license that says you're able to do this. The fact that I publish it on my website, an Excel spreadsheet, does not mean that it's open data if I'm not signaling clearly that it's something that you can reuse and not get into trouble, right? That's very important. So whenever we are talking about data sets, it's common to people to when we tell people, is it in open data format or is it open data? They'll say, yes, of course, it's accessible, but it is not the kind of information that we can use. So I really want to get a little bit more nuance on this. And this is kind of like it could be like a game, right? Is it open? And then people can say yes or no. And then we can, sense how we're all doing with this type of training or ability to discern, right? So for example, the type of data that's not really open, it's accessible, but it's locked. So what does it look like? Data that's behind a PDF. What's missing? Machine readability, right? So I can't analyze it, right? What's other kind of open data that's not really open? It's the one that's legally closed, right? It has no license, or it has restricted terms, and I need permission to reuse. It's risky if I use it without the permission, or I can't share it simply because there's no permission to do that. Again, doesn't mean that everything has to be shared fully. There's very good reasons why some information is legally closed, all right? Let's not get that confused. We're not saying that everything needs to be open. But there's also, for example, fragmented data, data that is spread across several files. If anybody has conducted research on a specific subject in the arts and cultural sector, and any sector for that matter, you'll find that most of the information that you need to put together comes from different sources, different data sets, measuring different things, right? So what's missing is interoperability, which is a term that has to do with how things talk to one another, right? For things to talk to one another, they might need to share certain codes. Sometimes this does not happen at all. You'll see that in the city, for example, each city agency might have its own cultural heritage, landmarks, data set. They're all measured differently. The fields are different. It is almost like they're seeing different realities, but it is the same monuments, for example, right? It's hard to combine, it's hard to compare. Now, there's also undocumented data, which means that there's no explanation as to where this came from, what it is, when it was created, who was responsible for it, who can I get in touch with to learn more about it, right? It lacks context, no definitions, no methodology, right? And it's easily misinterpreted. I'll give you three more. Internal, sorry, the name is one. Oh, I went back. Outdated data, data that is not updated regularly. Again, we have been in touch with that kind of data, of course. It has to do with timeliness and it leads us to wrong conclusions, right? Again, not all data has to be or can be updated regularly, but when it is information that comes regularly from a city agency, for example, we can expect that. We should expect that, right? There's also extractive data, which is the data that is collected from communities. And this is more of an issue of values and principles of fair use and justice, data justice, which is if I'm extracting data for a group, I have to be able to give it back and share it alike, right? It's an issue of reciprocity, access for contributors, and this reinforces inequity. We, through our research, have, of course, seen how the culture of data in the culture and arts sector for a long time has had this problem. A lot of data is extracted from organizations, but organizations don't have access to it, whether because it wasn't set up that way or because it followed a model that was proprietary, right? That was used for something else. It didn't have that follow through where it comes back to the community to be used, corrected, perfected, augmented, developed, right? And then there's this other part, which is the performative openness, right? The data is published, right? But its usability, its completeness, its intent, it's not really out there to be used fully, right? It looks open, but it isn't useful, right? So these are all the different typologies, let's say, of let's say data that has thin openness. Openness is very thin, right? There's a thin layer there that we can say it's open this ways, but really not in other ways. Some of them can lead you to places of great problems, even legal ones. Some of them can lead you to have um, the type of insights that are fully not based on reality. They assume many things because the data is not complete. So, quick check now that we are this way through. Have you ever encountered any of this kind of data in your work? Any of this data that we've been talking about frequently, sometimes, or if you're not sure? If you can write it on the chat, let us know. Does this ring a bell for you? Have you encountered outdated data, extractive data, performative data, legally closed data? Oh my God, the chat's blowing up. Frequently, yes, 100%. We'll give a prize to the first person who puts a GIF or a GIF or however you want to call it. All right. So yes, we're there, all of us together in this problem, right? Um, so let's talk about, oh, there we go. Tom Rush. So we know that this is very common to our field and to other fields, right? But let's talk about what we know empirically about the situation. Anecdotally, I'm sure we've had conversations at different points with other peers about how data is a problem. But we know, as we were saying, and we found out through this research project that we conducted last year, there's a report, it's on our data set. We'll put it on the chat so you can download it. It's quite long, has an executive summary, but a few of the most important headlines, right? Like I said, 9 out of 3,000 data sets relate to DCLA. This is not necessarily a number that reflects a problem as such. There are other departments that also have not that many data sets. Some of them, like the Department of Education and Transport, have a lot more data sets. But when you get into those data sets, you start realizing that perhaps they're not the most relevant, they're not the most up to date. There's some that are very difficult to understand where they came from and why are they there, right? You'll see in the portal itself, and this is something that we are working together with OTI and we will be working and hoping to collaborate with the fact that there's several tags in the portal that define culture and arts data, but they're called recreation or they're called entertainment or they're called other things, right? And there's not a culture and arts category as such that sort of grounds that. We need one of those, and this is something, of course, that can be worked on, right? And in general, what we'll see is that the data, as I was telling you with the monuments data, is siloed, right? One agency has a list, the other one has another one. We need to work to get all of that together. It's inconsistent, and there's not a standard for them, right? This makes the sector in general largely invisible in public data. The uh, the amount of data sets, the quality of the data sets, and also the relevance of the data sets. That invisibility is what concerns us, right? And why does this happen? We know that the government has uneven tools for enforcing, for example, the open data law, which we have, which was one of the first ones in the country, thanks to Council Member Brewer, as we like to remember. There's also competing priorities in the sector, right? Open data does not have that priority in our sector concretely, this is what we have seen. Philanthropy has a growing demand for data, but limited mechanisms for sharing it back. This is not particular to philanthropy, it's particular to many private agents, right? But we know in the ecosystem, this is something, a loop or a cycle that, if closed, would probably provide a lot of innovation, reduce costs, increase service delivery, right? Civil society as such, and we know this through different several projects, has limited capacity, not enough bandwidth, not enough people, no data person, let's say, or data specialists, because we're all data persons. We can argue that with Gonzalo forever. We all deal with data, right? But data specialists, data analysts, people that are only focused on extracting data, leveraging it, and working with technology, not at all, right? It's very hard to fund. And they're very much overburdened by reporting. How many surveys do you have to fill every year, every grant, every time you have to report, and then add another layer of sharing data? It's overwhelming, right? We've mapped the ecosystem of open data in our sector. There's a lot to be said there, but let's say that all these issues that come together present themselves, reinforce themselves, and they create a systemic problem. This is what we are trying to solve. A problem that does not come from DCLA or the Office of Technology or civil society. It is the relationships and challenges that they face together, right? And we also know that this is not a data problem as such. The data is there, can be there. It is more an issue of infrastructure, what sustains that ecology, right? These different actors. Now, what are the barriers? Structural, lack of tools, skills. Cultural, there's a lot of skepticism and habits. We're not used to sharing that. We're on you know, a competitive context. We're competing for grants. We're competing for many things, which is a whole other conversation we need to have. But we are working with the habit of protecting our information. Of course, sometimes rightly so, because it is private, but sometimes because we have been, raised on this system where that is creates a competitive advantage, right? And the idea of thinking it about as a public resource, a public good or a commons is not something that we're used to, right? There's also clear financial barriers. There's no funding for data work. And I'm, of course, generalizing, but it is very hard to find funding for a program that concentrates purely or specifically or especially on data, right? Now, again, for the people in the chat and to keep the gifs coming, which of these barriers is most real for your organization? Structural, cultural, or financial, would you say? Like if it's not cultural, if your organization is ready to go, you're there, let's share it, that's great. Perhaps it's more like you lack the tools, or is it financial? It probably will be a combination of both. All three, cultural, structural. For each one of those, there's a process we can do to learn and become more acquainted, increase our capacities to do this. And this is something that the Institute really wants to work on. So we're happy to have more conversations about this because this is the part of education that we all need to work together, um, together as a collective, right? Now, what can happen if open data is possible, right? I like that GIF of the so-so, right? So-so. Uh, Open data makes it possible for us to identify inequities. Now, these three things here are only a few of them, the general big ones, right? But there's a lot more. We can get a lot more nuance in this, right? Identify inequities, inform funding decisions. If we're re-granting organizations, this is particularly important for us. And we can track artist conditions. If we are placing the artist at the center of our work, we know that data here needs to come from culture and arts, sure, but also, well-being, health, housing, education, childcare, elder care. This is a place where a lot of different layers of data come together. All of them. But when we think about the artist, we think about the artist as a whole person. That's when all of these things come together, right? Now, question again, quickly, and this is very important actually for us at the Institute, and it would be wonderful if everybody could put something there. What data do you wish existed? What data are you searching for? Do you find yourself searching often in your work? And that you might just simply say, man, I wish that data was available. Even if you know it exists, but you don't know where it is. What is that kind of data that you're looking for and that you wish existed? Let us know because as we work through this, it helps us feel the temperature, right? What are people really going for that they cannot find? If you can tell us in the chat, that would be wonderful. Okay, so moving on. The benefits of open data are very different for each stakeholder, right? It creates value very differently across the sector. Arts and culture organizations, you know how we talk a lot about the narrative, telling stories, influencing, impacting, affecting change through stronger, more powerful stories. This is a way of doing it, right? It also allows us to advocate with evidence. If we're able to tell how much money was provided and how it was distributed in one year, how that changed and what that meant, we're able to advocate for a particular direction or way of doing things that might increase the impact or prevent harm from happening, right? For funders, it allows you to target funding more strategically, any funder, granting organizations, philanthropy, and it also allows you to identify gaps. Am I funding the same people all the time? And why, right? For example. And for government, design evidence-based policy. That means policy that's based on reality, not on anecdote, not on a particularly sort of closed-door discussion, but something that actually comes from putting it out there and perfecting it through interaction and dialogue. And it also, more importantly, it improves service delivery. Why is that very important in our sector? Because the city, the governments in general, state, citywide, um, deliver services, and those services can always be improved. They need to be improved, as you all know. Okay, so let's talk about three case studies for you to research homework for after this webinar about the kind of things that the sector is doing with data and moving towards open data, right? The Arts and Education Roundtable, who we're very happy to partner with, is an organization that developed a report called Paying for Professionalism, which focuses on teaching artists compensation and employment in the city. They did so because they could use the data from the portrait of New York State artists created by Creatives Real New York. So they grabbed that large data set, they focused only on New York City. They improved that data by adding a survey and being able to sort of look at that data in relationship to other types of information, qualitative information. And they provided this report, which is very useful for anybody who's working on this topic of teaching artists and all the challenges that come forth, right? So the Arts and Education Roundtable is doing this work because it can access open information, at least public information, that can be freely used, right, for their purposes. Creatives Real New York, as I just said, they have also grabbed their entire survey of 13,000 artists that provides information on demographics, economic conditions, and have shared it with different stakeholders, different organizations. The Institute actually is privileged enough to have received as well the data set, which will be publishing it in an open data format, and we have been charged with stewarding it over the years. This is perhaps one of the most comprehensive statewide surveys. I think it is the most comprehensive one that allows us to get a really granular understanding of
Beautiful. It's really
patterns
beautiful.
in the sector.
I mean,
I'm going to ask if anybody is out there with their microphone on, please turn them off. And then there's one that we like. So the first one is New York City. The second one is New York State. And the third one is one that's happening in Africa right now. It's a collaborative project by a bunch of researchers, and it's Open Restitution Africa. They're working on an open data platform to restitute African culture heritage from all these different museums in the global minority that have these resources that need to come back home, right? And they're centralizing this information, they're crossing information, they're building this whole thing, leveraging the power of open data, and using this as a way of presenting the evidence of at a large scale. So it's very exciting. Their open data platform, I think, comes out this year at some point. So stay tuned. There's a newsletter. They have wonderful videos where you can learn more about what they're doing. And this is a really great example of leveraging open data in the cultural sector, heritage in this case. Okay, so all of this stuff that we're talking about right now is essentially suggests a shift in how we think about data. This is what we require. This is what we're pushing for at the Institute, and what we would love for you to consider as you move on through your work thinking about data, right? From data as reporting, right, to data as a shared infrastructure. It is very different to think about data as something that you have to put out there because you need to report and, it's part of your accountability. That's absolutely necessary and normal. But let's say we think about it as a piece of a larger shared infrastructure. What that information, with the ethical boundaries and regulations that we, of course, need to have, what if that contributes to a greater ecology of data understood as a shared infrastructure, something that sustains an ecology in a constructive, positive, sustainable way, right? So with this in mind, and I'll start closing and giving you a cliffhanger, if you will, because tomorrow at 6 p.m. we have an event at Brick House called From Open Data to Data Commons, where we're going to be presenting a project that we have been working on the past years that is based on the conclusions and the insights that we obtained from that research, that report, that research project that we did on data in the cultural sector. And it is essentially creating a data commons, building a data commons collectively. Now, what is a data commons? It's essentially shared data that is collectively governed, right? And more concretely, what we're doing is we're going to build, or we are building actually, in the last few months, uh, open data portal, sustained by civil society, governed through a council of organizations that have as an objective uh, gathering and sharing the organization that several stakeholders and actors in the sector have been producing over the last several years in a way, in a format, through licensing and through all these different principles of open data, um, and set them up in a way that they can be used for innovation, for greater impact and advocacy, and for lots of different um, objectives that the sector has. And we know this through the research that we've conducted. So it's really important to think about the open data portal that we're doing as not just the portal in itself, right? The Culture Data Commons wants to be more than a website, of course. There's the technology part, yes, which is very exciting, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a governance part where we will constitute a culture data council of different organizations that will help us move along as we share more information and really take good care and steward that information correctly. There's the education part, which means to build capacities in our sector, train organizations that need that training, that want to work and leverage that data. And there's the advocacy. If you've ever been in in a hearing of the council, of the committee of culture, we've had the opportunity to talk about this and how open data and data in general for the sector is a really, really important thing to focus on and to push forward. We've been doing that in the testimonies. This is something that the Culture Data Commons wants to do as well, is advocate to create the conditions where this kind of work flourishes. Now, I must say the open data portal that we're building, the Culture Data Commons, is not meant to compete with the city's open data portal. If we have that impression, then my objective behind this presentation failed miserably. The idea is that we should move into an ecosystem of non-competition, of collaborative work, where different mandates, different roles are fulfilled to its highest level. In our case, it's the mandate of civil society, nonprofits, the civic space, generating an infrastructure in our own terms where we are responsible ethically, technically, to sustain data as a public good, right? Um, and this is something that we will continue to work in the rest of the year, and that we would love to have conversations with any of you in this call that's interested in working with data and sharing it through these particular values, right? So our baby open data portal, because it just started, is trying to answer a question, right? What would collective stewardship of data on culture and arts look like? What I'm going to show you is just a few screen captures because I'm going to save the thicker presentation for tomorrow at 6 p.m. And I want to leave some space for questions in this particular training. But the Culture Data Commons is a place where different organizations, which we actually refer to as commoners, right? Uh, as part of our lingo, uh, come together to have a space in which they can share their information and their data sets and all the different resources that they are generating and that they are able to share, right? So right now, as I said, we are working in partnership with the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. We're stewarding the Creatives Rebuild New York Portrait of New York State Artist data set, and we're testing and loading several data sets to just really perfect this platform and that is useful for you. You can search data sets. When you find a data set, you'll find different files in machine readable formats with the proper licenses. For example, this one is of the Portrait of New York State Artist Survey. You have also, it's tagged correctly. It tells you all the information you need to know. And it also includes, for example, a code book, which is essentially a guide that you can use to just learn where this came from, what the methodology was, what all these fields are. And this is the kind of information that researchers, but also advocates, require to be able to make sense of this wealth of knowledge, right? Now you also have previews where you can see this information and look through it and try to find the kind of information that will make sense for you. We're also experimenting with data from other sectors that is relevant to our work, for example, from the parks permits areas, right? Whoever works in public space, I'm sure, is interested in this kind of things. We're also working with cross-sector information. You can visualize it as well. One of the things that we're most excited about this is that it is an opportunity as well to use technology to preserve information. As we know, in the current state of affairs, data disappears, right? Whether it be data on any sector, as you know, tends is something that we hadn't contemplated before, but it can easily disappear. It's something that we cannot take for granted. So we're starting to experiment with harvesters, essentially the kind of process that pulls information from a data set, creates a copy for preservation, and
No.
also can help us use that data set for other purposes, right? We're also going to be organizing this information in terms of mapping information, directory information, and all sorts of other collections of data that we can use.
Mauricio,
Yes.
just a time check, right? You have 10 minutes for questions.
Ooh, 10 minutes for questions. I'm done. We welcome you to the presentation on the Culture Data Commons tomorrow. And I'll finish with this. Three takeaways. So we know that data shapes the sector. Open data makes it usable, shared, and actionable. We need the shared infrastructure. And the goal is just not to have more data. It's to create better conditions for that data to be shared, understood, and used collectively. And I'll leave you with things that you can do. Go to the Open Data portal and check for a data set. Ask for data in usable formats all the time, not only PDFs. Document your own data, structure it. There's a lot of training material for you to do that. The School of Data this weekend is a very important place to learn about. Share small data sets openly, make sure they have the right licenses, and collaborate with others. That would be incredible. So thank you.